Happy Thursday, everyone. I'm Coach Loretta. I'm here with Coach Reese, and we're here with the Dirt Trail Running Podcast, Coffee with Coaches. And today I think we have an interesting show where we're going to talk a little bit about HIIT training and long, slow distance and kind of really dive into that, like what's the purpose of each. So it was actually Reese's brilliant topic idea. So I'm going to let Reese start us off.
Yeah, totally, Loretta. So I kind of want to start off by clarifying like what is high intensity interval training, what is like that long steady state, long slow endurance training. So like when we talk about high intensity interval training, we're not talking about doing strides, which we've mentioned before in the podcast, which is 30 seconds or so where you're building up to like a 5K or a 3K effort, and then you're ramping back down. High intensity interval training, just like the name implies, interval, it has a set period where you're going hard and it has a set period where you are relaxing. And usually high intensity interval training sessions are going to be near max effort. Like we've heard a lot about like Tabata intervals, whether you're doing like 30 on, 30 off, you're doing that for a number of sets and a number of reps. Or you're doing other types of high intensity interval work where you're going really hard for only a few minutes and then you have a very brief type of recovery. I want to talk about the differences between like what kind of adaptations does the high intensity interval training get us, and what type of intensity do those long steady state, long slow distances get us. So long slow distance, LSD, it's kind of the acronym that's thrown around kind of satirically by the endurance community because of reasons. But like I don't like to prescribe to the idea of long slow distance, right? Like it's more long easy distance, so more LED instead of LSD. And the reason I say that is because if you have a good aerobic engine, and depending on your perspective of what is slow, what is fast, those runs can actually be to somebody else a little bit quicker. But as long as they're easy to you and easy to your aerobic system, easy on your body, then it's a good LED run. So I think from here on out, maybe I'll start using LED runs instead of LSD.
Like
so
LED, let's light it up.
exactly. Long, easy distance runs. What kind of adaptation?
A new coined term right here by Coach Reese on the Dirt Trail Running Podcast. You can only hear that here.
I think that's important to distinguish, because what is slow to one person might not be slow to another person. So what's the relativity? The relativity is what kind of stress does it put on your cardiovascular system? So I think it would be great to just kind of banter back and forth about like, when would we put high intensity interval training in somebody's calendar? When would we put long easy distance in somebody's calendar? So with that, Loretta, what do you think of when you think of high intensity interval training, and where do you like typically, or do you even program that type of training for your athletes?
For sure. So when I'm programming specifically for an ultra marathon, I'm going to program that out the furthest away from a race. So I'm going from least specific to most specific in my programming. So we're thinking about, 100-mile on the calendar. Most specific to 100-mile is more of that long, easy distance, right? So building up that endurance, where further out is we're kind of building the building blocks for raising the ceiling, right? So that's when I'm going to be focusing more on that HIIT type workout. And I think HIIT can be done in a few different ways too. I mean, definitely in our running, but it also can be done in our strength training. I do have some of my athletes that are going, let's say, to Orange Theory or to CrossFit, and they're getting some of that. So I like to be mindful too, when we're thinking about HIIT, and they're doing some of those outside activities, that I'm making sure to balance it with their week of their training as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I personally love that idea. I like to put high intensity interval training like furthest away from somebody's like a race, because we deal with ultra marathoners, we coach ultra marathoners. So if your race is in like April, May, June, like about now is when I would start putting some stuff in there if an athlete is interested, and if it works well with their transition season and where they've built up to. But I also want to mention too that high intensity interval training is a really good sharpener for just before a race. So for example, like the difference, let's take high intensity interval training versus strides. So a stride, I usually tell somebody, build up to a 5K or 3K effort for 10 seconds. So you ramp up for 10 seconds, you hold that 5K effort for 10 seconds, you slowly ramp back down for 10 seconds. And then I usually generally give people like a 2-minute recovery. I just say, go run easy. If you want to walk, go walk. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you feel recovered for the next one. I don't want your heart rate up. I want you feeling good by the end of that 2 minutes. Whereas if I were to program that as a high intensity interval training type of session, I would say, hey, let's do some 30-30s, where for 30 seconds, you are going to go hard. I want you breathing like you're gasping for air, like a fish out of water. But then for that 30 seconds, I still want you running, but you don't have enough time to be fully recovered in 30 seconds after going really hard for 30
Right,
seconds.
right.
If we build that over time. So let's say we do 10 sets of 30-by-30s, which is pretty aggressive for most people, but just to make numbers pretty easy, 10 sets of 30-by-30s. You start your 30-by-30s and you're at X pace. By the time you finish, your hard pace at the end of 10 intervals is going to be a lot slower if you do that right compared to the first one. So what kind of adaptations are you getting from that? You're getting mainly repeatability, and you're getting mainly the ability to kind of sit in that pain cave for a little bit. So I think for us ultra marathoners, most of our races are going to be at that like easy intensity. So this isn't really super specific for people, right? But
Right. But it also focuses on that when we talk about what kind of interval is it. It's more of a VO2 type of activity. It's something you can do short and fast for under 5 minutes.
Yep, exactly. And but where that can be used as like a sharpener for somebody close to their race is maybe your race is really hilly and it's got a bunch of punchy hills and you're practicing closing those punchy hills hard. Maybe you look at your elevation profile and there's a couple really good climbs and you know that like, hey, like I'm gonna want to hit these guys tough. So you're getting that repeatability of like, I'm going to hammer up this hill really hard. And then I got a couple seconds to run down the hill and recover. And then I got another hill that I'm going to hammer hard and I'm going to recover. High intensity interval sessions are pretty short for comparatively to our other workouts like tempos or thresholds or LED workouts. But the beauty in them is that you get to use that high end effort for a brief period of time. So we're not putting like a ton of skeletal muscular stress on you, but you get to really tap into what is my upper aerobic threshold and my super aerobic threshold, your like VO2 max plus type of effort feel like on your body. So that's where it can be used as a good like preseason or transition season work to just get your legs spinning and get you refamiliarized very briefly with that upper end. And it can be used as a sharpener for a race if you want to be able to close pretty hard after a while.
Yeah.
So
And I
that's
like it also. I think psychologically I like it because it makes you work harder than you ever work. And so, and you're breathing pretty hard. It can get pretty uncomfortable. So it kind of teaches you a little bit to push out of comfortable, I think. I think as ultra endurance athletes, we're often in the comfortable zone, or that's where most of our training should occur. And so I think when we do this, it pushes us outside of comfortable so we can get used to being uncomfortable.
Yep. And when we think about it too, 10 sets of 30-by-30s, that's only 5 minutes of really hard work. But then when you go and you add up all of like the pacing of those 30-by-30s, you'll see that like, hey, I did 5 minutes at a really tough pace. And you get those little recoveries like in between or whatever. But it definitely gets you working hard for a short amount of time. And you can modify these as you want. Maybe you do 2 sets of 10 or you do 2 sets of 5 if you need a little bit more recovery with a couple minutes in between. But the idea is when you're in your working sets, you're taking incomplete recovery. So that's why these high intensity interval training sessions are pretty butt kicking, but for a very short amount of time. So for somebody who's not too familiar with like pushing that hard or that fast, we don't want them to do it for a super long time because then we risk having so much fatigue that form goes down the tube. Maybe you stop paying attention if cars are coming, like whatever it is, right? So it's a great way to introduce that high intensity stimulus, but for a brief duration, that's not going to really cash somebody out.
Right. And if you haven't been doing it, you do want to start maybe with doing a little bit of stride work or something ahead of time so your body is used to a little bit of that faster pace so that you don't risk injury, right? You wouldn't want to jump right into, okay, I just heard Coach Reese say do 10-by-30 seconds, Tabata today on the podcast. I wouldn't run right out and do that if your body's not used to that, but it is something that you could get to.
That is incredibly important to say too. So when we mention these things, like when I program for an athlete, like I would never put this workout in unless we've been consistently working on strides. We're consistently injury free. Like whenever I program high intensity interval things for people, I want to make sure they're a little bit more robust first. And I do just want to mention too that the adaptations that you get from a high intensity interval training session are they get materialized in the body very quickly and they leave very quickly too, which is what makes them a good sharpener right before a race. Maybe you've been doing a lot of LED runs and you just want to put some like pep in your step, fire up your lungs a little bit, have some fun. I know I love running really hard, really fast for a short amount of time. It's just fun. Then you can get some pretty brief adaptations in the 1 to 2 weeks before a race, as opposed to your LED runs. Like a lot of LED running is going to take weeks, if not months, to actually materialize. However, those adaptations like mitochondrial density, capillarization, difference in stroke volume, are going to be a lot longer lasting than some of the enzymatic reactions or adaptations that you'll get from high intensity interval training.
And I love that we're talking about this on what we consider more of an ultra marathon podcast, right? Because I think there's sometimes a misconception about what ultra runners do. Like, oh, I mean, I recently have been going to a sports medicine doctor to have some things done. And he's like, well, you do all your work in zone 1 and zone 2. So this is going to be just fine for you. Well, hold up. That's not where I do all of my work. I do a lot of my work there, but that's not only. And I think sometimes people get that in their head that that's where it's at, is that's all we do. So I love that we're having this conversation, and I personally enjoy HIIT type training.
Yeah, and I think when we think about like the ultra marathoner, like we think about like the classical like prototype of what an ultra runner is, and that's somebody who's like shirtless in the woods like Anton, who just loves going out and having fun in the mountains and doesn't care about pace, doesn't care. And that's all great, and that's why we're here, because we just love this sport. If somebody told me you can never do high intensity interval training again, but you can go outside as much as you want to, I would say, yeah, give me that option, because I just love experiencing the environment, right? But when we do add these little scientific pieces, these little doses at certain times, we can take what we think our capacity is and level that up with not a lot of extra work. Take it or leave it for what you will. If you never want to do high intensity interval training, that's fine. I totally understand. Right. But there are a certain amount of gains that you can get that can make your races either easier if you're not looking to go out and like compete hard or put yourself in the well. It can just make your race easier, give you a little bit more buffer space between like how hard you're actually pushing and like where your finishing time is. Or it can be that extra like couple percentage points that you need to break through a plateau or hit that PR that you've been wanting to hit for a while. So I think it's something that we can all definitely use. And the best thing about this time of year too is that these workouts, I mean, with a warm up and a cool down, like you shouldn't be out there for over an hour. I'm thinking like before like somebody does an high intensity interval workout, I want them easy running, and I'm talking easy running for at least about 20 minutes, because that'll fire up your aerobic system. So that way, when you go and you hit those high intensity, those intervals, we're not only operating on like your creatine phosphate system or your aerobic glycolytic system. We kind of have all those engines geared up. Your body's warmed up. It's colder time of the year, right? So like your muscles have been moving, generating heat. We're feeling good. We're not going to pull any muscles. After 20 minutes, you spend 20 minutes total, maybe, usually about like 10 to 15 or so is what I'll give most people in a high intensity interval workout. And then the rest of your time is just an easy cool down. So like for this time of year, when it's hard to be outside in the cold, or it's so dark out and you want to be running in the light. So if you start at 8 o'clock in the morning, because that's when the sun rises, you only have till 9, things like that. It's just a more consolidated, condensed workout that'll not only like be challenging, but it'll make you feel good, and you'll be done within an hour. Give it an hour and a half and you're already showered up and good to go,
Right. I agree.
So now LED running, we kind of touched on this earlier, but I just want to mention that this is kind of like the bread and butter of most endurance programs, right? Like we have our easy mileage days to just kind of help like foster along some of the adaptations from our key workout days. And then we have that one day a week that, we have the sacred long run. And that should be your long, easy intensity run for the week. And if you're away from your race, take those nice and chill. Like there's no reason to even be anywhere around marathon pace or 50K pace or even 50-mile pace. I know a lot in this past year, if we take my 2022 Hennepin 50-mile time, like a lot of my easy runs were slower than my average pace per mile of the fifth. So when we think about those easy runs, like yeah, they should be easy. If you're going to do like 10 to 15 miles at like an easy intensity, something that you would do a 50 miler in, like, of course you should be able to do that really easily because you don't want to be smoked 15 miles into a 50 miler. You know what I mean? So you can kind of use that as like a rough guide as just some way to point your direction or point your training in the direction of like, am I going easy enough? You know?
Right. I like to think about just going out there and moving my legs. Like it's just effortless, just moving my legs for for the time that I need to go out, not anything that I have to really focus on or work hard.
Exactly. And those do a great job at maintaining our aerobic base that we've built so hard over the past couple years. If you've been in ultra running for a while, or maybe it's just the past couple months, those really help to just keep fostering along those aerobic gains. And again, like, those longer intensity or those longer, easier intensity runs, those gains are materialized over months, over years. So that's something that like, that's why we all keep it as a staple in our training plans. If you don't know what to do and you got a Saturday or a Sunday off, like if you can't do a workout or, if coach hasn't written you your training plan, which they should have by then, like, go out for just like, an hour and a half, 2 hours at an easy intensity. And sure, it doesn't feel hard on the lungs. And it shouldn't really feel too hard on the body either if you're doing it right. We should build up a little bit of fatigue, but you shouldn't be smoked at the end of it.
Yeah.
That's a great way to just keep fostering along everything that you've built up over the past few months or years or decades, however long you've been in the sport.
I think that's a good point. I think that if you're doing it at an easy effort, the way that you should be, those long runs shouldn't be so taxing for you. So after you're done with a long run, you shouldn't be like, I can't move the rest of the day because I'm so exhausted from it. Or the next day, you should be able to bounce back pretty quickly, if you've been doing these long runs consistently. It's not something that should just take it all out of you. If it is, you may need to relook at that because you might be going more at your race pace effort versus your easy pace. I actually just recently put up on our Instagram page an ultra runner rate of perceived exertion chart. So you can check that out and kind of see where you should fall in there on these easy efforts too. And on the high intensity efforts. Like I think that tops out as being chased by a mountain lion. So you'll know the idea of how you should feel.
And like we put a lot of context into like what is easy, but I think too it's important to mention like what is long, because long is relative to everybody as well. So I think, when I'm talking to my athletes, like we plan their long run based on, of course, what has come before, where they've been in the past, where we're moving to. But let's say somebody contacts me today and is like, yeah, I don't know how long of a run I should have. And, after working with an athlete for like a week or two, maybe I ask them like, hey, how are you feeling? How was your breathing? How was your body feeling after the last long run? And if an athlete tells me, hey, like it wasn't too hard on my lungs, I feel like I could talk, I feel like I could sing Red Hot Chili Peppers in the woods. This guy get back and you're like, man, my knees felt like they were pounded into the ground, or God, my quads are smoked. You're like, oh, my hamstring is cramping. Like those are probably signs that sure, it wasn't too long or too fast on your heart and your lungs, but it was probably a little bit too long on your skeletal muscular system. So we got to think about those two in conjunction with each other. So for that athlete, I would say, hey, yeah, like we need to scale down that mileage a little bit because we want your body to continually make adaptations without getting soreness and making you feel like you're slugged on the couch for the rest of the day or a couple of days, because that's going to, of course, impact how we're running our workouts the next week, right? So we want this to be like a stepwise progression without ever feeling like slugged in our chair. Say that same athlete comes to me and says, yeah, like, like I finished the mileage, like my body feels fine, like I didn't feel slugged, but like, you look at the heart rate data, or they tell you that like, man, like I was huffing and puffing and I was sweating and there were portions where like I was kind of losing control. It's like, well, okay, it wasn't too long in your body, but it was too fast in your system. Like I want people to be like out there having a good time, stopping, taking pictures, being able to like that's one of my favorite things to do, and that's how I catch up with my family a lot, is like I'll call people through my Bluetooth headphones and be like, hey, what's going on? Like you might hear me breathing, but I can still talk with you. So those are some good ways to just kind of contextualize like, hey, where is your long, where is your easy distance run.
Yeah, I also do the same thing. Lots of phone calls, on some of those long runs like that. But my mom will always be like, is it windy? I can't hear you very well. It must be really windy there.
Yeah. And those long, easy distance runs, classically our long runs of the week, those, as we build them closer to a race, maybe we start to get a little bit more specific, where we do a majority easy and then we finish off with something that's specific, whether that's on terrain or we do a couple intervals on tired legs. As it gets really close to the race, maybe we're doing the entire LED distance at what we want to be your race pace, just to see how it feels, see how you're fueling, how you're eating, things like that. For marathoners, a lot of this looks like, you start with just easy mileage, you start to sprinkle in some marathon paced efforts, and you have that easy running in between. And then as you get closer to your marathon, you've now built up a wider range of like how many miles are you running at that marathon intensity. And then once you're like 2 to 3 weeks out, of course, we're not going to get crazy amount of adaptations for your race. We're just going to get a bunch of fatigue on the legs. So that's when we want to start tapering down our LED runs, not eliminating them completely, right? But like say, like if you're an ultra marathoner who's built up to routinely doing 3 to 4 hour training runs on the weekends, maybe we scale you back down to 2 hours and then maybe like an hour and a half the week before the race or so, just so we can kind of keep that in, but reduce some of the fatigue while keeping some of the specific work in during the week. So that way, like you feel fresh for the race. You don't feel overtaxed. Like your LED run doesn't have to be like long all the time, So that's something that ebbs and flows in training.
Right, for sure. Yeah.
Well, good. I think, like this was kind of a podcast snack for us. It was great getting online and talking with you about high intensity interval training versus long, easy distance training. Is there anything else that you want to mention about like the differences between HIIT and LED runs?
No, I think it's we've wrapped it up. I do think, thinking about your balance throughout the week is super good when you're thinking about these things too. So we still want to try to keep more like 80% of our running in that easier pace and only that top 20-ish% in that hard to moderate. So when you're building a plan out, be mindful of that, because if we have too much of one or the other, then that's not a recipe for success.
Absolutely. So if anybody has any questions about how to program those types of workouts into their routine, let us know. We love talking with athletes about how we can get them their extra couple percentage points in effort and in goal setting. So yeah, it was great chatting with you today, Loretta. Thanks for getting on.
Nice chatting with you. Bye.
All right.